can be here too, I guess. Okay. Hello, disheveled vagrants who climb out of the grave at night. I have gotten my family's permission to record a video, so I'm sure they can hear everything, but I'm just gonna ignore them. I feel like it didn't really make it clear what my plan was, but I figured right now, I'm usually busy all week because, like, doing schoolwork at home means that basically all day is classwork. All day is class. All day is class. Class is forever now. And I don't have time to, like, prep stuff, so even if I was gonna be running an online game, I don't feel prepared for that yet. If I am gonna do that, I'm probably gonna want to include some sort of video component to that, like Google Hangouts, or I think Google Hangouts is like the last thing that I heard that involved like visual stuff, because I'm a really visual person and I would feel bad, like you'd be missing out on all of the ambiance and the costume and the props, and I'm just unreasonably attached to that for some reason. We could do just voice or just text. It wouldn't, I don't think I'm nearly as prepared for that kind of thing, and I'm not great when it comes to like theater of the mind. I'm not great at guesstimating distances, judging how large an object should be, how large a creature should be. I'm not great with that kind of thing. So I think if we are going to do that, I'm going to have to ask that I do some sort of video component. I know that's not what people want to hear. At least I would like to be on screen and probably showing some like pre-drawn visuals. So I am going to require some time to like get that stuff ready. But I felt kind of bad. I haven't really had the chance to engage with you using online means, which I'm totally capable of doing. It's just that I've been doing stuff, and that's how it be. Also, my arm really hurts. I got stung by a wasp. It's hard to do anything. It's hard to do anything now. We're not allowed to do things in 2020 anymore. Since we're not doing that, I thought that instead I'm going to read you some scary stories. It's just like the games. I could read to you in the meantime. I have other books, but they're chapter books. They're long. Could still watch movies. I don't know. I'm sorry that this is happening. This is not what I planned. I don't think it's what anyone planned. I don't think. Night has fallen. It's dark outside, so turn down your lights and get comfortable, and we're just gonna hang out. This one's called Coldest Clay. So, a farmer had a daughter for whom she cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim. The farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the country. Soon after she left, Jim got sick, and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death, he could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life that they might have had together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on their uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things, and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It aches something terrible," he told her. She put her hand on his forehead. "Why, you're as cold as clay," she said. "I hope you're not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. He was covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father told her the truth about Jim's death. They quickly went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open his grave. The corpse was in its coffin, but around its head, they found the girl's handkerchief. Get you a man who comes back from the grave just for you. This one's my favorite. Okay. Haunted house. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in a settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they would always get scared by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house. Went on in, built himself a good fire and lit a lamp, sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he had heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped back and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again. Step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do, and then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through, so he turned his chair to where he would watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible up before him, then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the father spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so you could see the bones and parts of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. And she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told her how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her bones in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. And she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, "If you come back here one more time after this, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is laid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down to the floor, and she was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house after midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. And when he did, he found a big sack of money. And where the haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth, and it never did come out. I like that one, because it has this picture. I like it. Actually, I got this one first, even though it's the second book in the series. This isn't my original copies. That's a whole other story, though. The window. Margaret and her brothers, Paul and David, shared a small house on top of a hill, just outside the village. It was so warm, one summer's night, that Margaret could not sleep. She sat up in bed in the darkness of her room, watching the moon move across the sky. Suddenly, something caught her eye. She saw two small yellow-green lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some animal, but she could not make out what kind of creature it was. Soon the creature left the woods and moved up the hill toward the house. For a few minutes, Margaret lost sight of it, and she saw it coming across the lawn, toward her window. It looked something like a man, and yet it didn't. Margaret was terrified. She wanted to run from her room, but the door was next to her window. She was afraid the creature could see her and break in before she would escape. When the creature turned and moved in another direction, Margaret rushed to the door, but before she could open the door, it was back. Margaret found herself staring through the window at a shrunken face like that of a mummy. Its yellow-green eyes gleamed like cat's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she was so frightened that she could not make a sound. The creature broke the window glass, unlocked the window, and crawled inside. Margaret tried to flee, but the creature caught her, twisted its long, bony fingers into her hair, pulled back her head, and sank its teeth into her throat. Margaret screamed and fainted. When her brothers heard her piercing scream, they rushed to the room. By the time the door unlocked, the creature had fled. Margaret lay on the floor, bleeding and unconscious. While Paul tried to stop the bleeding, David chased the creature down the hill toward a graveyard, but soon he lost sight of it. The police thought it was the work of some escaped lunatic who believed he was a vampire. When Margaret recovered, her brothers wanted to move her to a safer place, where it would be harder to break in, but Margaret refused. The creature would just come back. She was sure of that, but just in case, Paul and David began to keep loaded pistols in their rooms. One night, months later, Margaret was awakened by a scratching sound out the window. When she opened her eyes, there was the same shrunken face staring at her. That night, her brother heard her cry sometimes. They chased the creature down the hill, and David shot it in the leg, but the creature managed to scramble over the graveyard wall and disappear near an old burial vault. The next day, Margaret and her brothers watched as the sexton of the church opened the burial vault. Inside was a horrifying scene. Broken coffins, bones, rotting flesh scattered all over the floor. Only one coffin had not been disturbed. When the sexton opened it, there lay the creature with a shrunken face that had attacked Margaret, telltale bullet still in its leg. They did the only thing they knew how to get rid of themselves with a vampire. The sexton built a roaring blaze outside the vault and fed the shrunken body to the flames. They watched the body burn until nothing remained but ashes. That always freaked me out because we had a big window in our house. We still have a big window in our house, so I guess that's just gonna be the end of me. Something was wrong. One morning, John Sullivan found himself walking along a street downtown. He could not explain what he was doing there, or how he got there, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking toward him, and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said, and smiled. "Can you tell me the time?" When she saw him, she screamed and ran. Then John Sullivan noticed that other people were afraid of him. They saw him coming. They flattened themselves against a building, or ran across the street to stay out of his way. "Must be something wrong with me," John Sullivan thought. "I'd better go home." He hailed the taxi, but the driver took one look at him and sped away. John Sullivan did not understand what was going on. It scared him. "Maybe somebody at home can come and get me," he thought. He found a telephone and called his wife, but a voice he did not recognize answered. "Is Miss Sullivan there?" he asked. "No, she's at a funeral," the voice said. "Mr. Sullivan was killed yesterday in an accident downtown." Uh-oh. Somebody dropped something. Sounds. The house was near the beach. It was a big old place where nobody had lived for years. From time to time, somebody would force a window or a door open and spend the night there, but never longer. 3 fishermen caught in a storm took shelter there one night. With some dry wood they found inside, they made a fire in the fireplace. They lay down on the floor and tried to get some sleep, but none of them slept that night. First, they heard footsteps upstairs. It sounded like there were several people moving back and forth, and one of the fishermen called, "Who's up there?" The footsteps stopped, and they heard a woman scream. The scream turned into a groan and died away. Blood began to drip from the ceiling into the room where the fishermen huddled. A small red pool formed on the floor and soaked into the wood. The door upstairs crashed, and again the woman screamed, "Not me!" she cried. It sounded as if she was running, her high heels tapping wildly down the hall. "I'll get you," a man shouted. The floor shook as he chased her. Then silence. There wasn't a sound until the man who had shouted began to laugh. Long peals of horrible laughter filled the house. It went on and on till the fishermen thought they would go mad. When finally it stopped, the fishermen heard someone coming down the stairs, dragging something heavy that bunched on each step. They heard him drag it through the front hall and out the front door. Door opened, and then it slammed shut. Again, silence. Suddenly a flash of lightning filled the house with a green blaze of light, and a ghastly face stared at the fishermen from the hallway. There came a crash of thunder. Terrified, they ran out into the storm. That one was freaky for me when I was a kid, because, you got the sense that something real bad happened. You know, when you're in 5th grade, they don't tell you about murder. And that's a fact. You can take that to the bank. They don't tell you about ghosts in 5th grade, which they should. I had to take it upon myself to learn about that one. This one's kind of funny to me. I don't think it's supposed to be. Rings on her fingers. Daisy Clark had been in a coma for more than a month when the doctor said that she had finally died. She was buried on a cool summer day in a small cemetery about a mile from her home. May she always rest in such peace, her husband said, but she didn't. Late that night, a grave robber with a shovel and a lantern began to dig her up. Since the ground was still soft, he quickly reached the coffin and got it open. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried, wearing 2 valuable rings. The thief got down on his knees and reached into the coffin to get the rings, but they were stuck fast on her fingers, so he decided the only way to get them off was to cut off her fingers with a knife. But when he began to cut into the finger of the wedding ring, it began to bleed, and Daisy Clark began to stir. Suddenly, she sat up. Terrified, the thief scrambled to his feet. He accidentally kicked over the lantern, and the light went out. He could hear Daisy climb out of her grave. As she moved past him in the dark, he stood there frozen with fear, clutching the knife in his hand. When Daisy saw him, she pulled the shroud around her and asked, "Who are you?" When the grave robber heard this corpse speak, he ran. Daisy shrugged her shoulders and walked on and never once looked back. But in his fear and confusion, the thief fled in the wrong direction. He pitched headlong into her grave, fell on the knife, and stabbed himself. While Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death. That's what you get. Take that as a lesson. Don't cut off people's fingers when they're dead, because you never know when they might be in a coma, and they've been prematurely buried. Some of these are so short that it's like, you did it. You broke ghost stories down to its bare essentials. Oh, Susanna. Susanna and Jane shared a small apartment near the university where they were students. When Susanna got back from the library one night, the lights were out and Jane was asleep. Susanna undressed in the dark and quickly got into bed. She had almost fallen asleep when she heard someone humming the tune to the song, "Oh, Susanna." "Jane," she said, "please stop humming. I want to get some sleep." Jane didn't answer, but the humming stopped, and Susanna fell asleep. She wakened early the next morning, too early, she decided, and was trying to get back to sleep when she heard the humming again. "Please, go back to sleep," she told Jane. "It's too early to get up." Jane didn't answer, but the humming continued. Susanna became angry. "Cut it out," she said. "It's not funny." When the humming still did not stop, she lost her temper. She jumped out of bed, pulled the covers off Jane, and screamed. Jane's head was gone. Somebody had cut off her head. "I'm having a nightmare," Susanna told herself. "When I wake up, everything will be all right." This one's a game that you can play. I wouldn't recommend that you do it. It's called The Ghost in the Mirror. It's a scary game that young people sometimes play. I guess they do. I don't know. Trying to conjure up a ghost in their bathroom mirror. Many don't really believe that a ghost is going to appear, but they try to raise one anyway, for the fun and the excitement. I love the way this is written. You might not even believe in ghosts, but you might try to face one up anyways, for the fun and excitement. Some are willing to settle for any ghost, but others have a particular ghost in mind. One of those is a ghost named Mary Worth. She's the heroine of an old comic strip, but some say she was actually a witch who was hanged at the infamous witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. Another of these ghosts is La Llorona, the weeping woman who wanders the streets of cities and towns from Texas to California and throughout Mexico looking for her lost child. Still another is Mary Wales, a lot of Marys, a young woman who is supposed to have been killed in a car accident in Indianapolis, Indiana, around 1965. Her ghost is one of the vanishing hitchhikers. It is said that again and again she thumbs a ride home in a passing car and then vanishes before she gets there. Here's how ghost hunters try to rate his ghost. Okay, write this down. Write this down. You're not a ghost hunter until you know this stuff. First, they find a quiet bathroom, close the door, and turn off the lights. Second, while they stare at their face in the mirror, they repeat the ghost's name, usually 47 times or 100 times. If any ghost will do, they say any ghost in place of a name. If they do manage to raise one, its face will slowly replace their face in the mirror. Some say a ghost is likely to be angry at getting disturbed. If it gets angry enough, they say, it will try to shatter the mirror and come right into the room. But a player can always turn on the lights and send the ghost back to where it came from. And when that happens, the game is over. So you can do that with the free time that you now may have. The appointment. I'm about death. And there's a drum one. Oh, the liver eating one. The cannibalism. You know the cannibalism ones? They all have a cannibalism story. I don't know if people used to do that back in 1991. I don't know what was going on in 1991. I wasn't around then. Who knows? They're probably eating each other. This one is just delicious. George Flint loved to eat. Each day at noon, he closed his camera shop for 2 hours and went home for a big lunch. His wife Mina cooked for him. George was a bully, and Mina was a timid woman who did everything he asked because she was afraid of him. On his way home for lunch one day, George stopped at the butcher shop and bought a pound of liver. He loved liver. He would have Mina cook it for dinner that night. Despite all his complaints about her, she was a very good cook. While George ate his lunch, Mina told him that a rich old woman in town had died. Her body was in the church next door. It was in an open coffin. Anyone who wanted to see her could. As usual, George was not interested in what Mina had to say. "I've got to get back to work," he told her. After he left, Mina began to cook the liver. She added vegetables and spices and simmered it all afternoon, just the way George liked it. When she thought it was done, she cut off a small piece and tasted it. It was delicious, the best she had ever made. She ate a second piece, then a third. It was so good that she could not stop eating it. It was only when all the liver was gone that she thought of George. He would be coming home soon. What would he do when she found out that she'd eaten all the liver? Someone would laugh, but not George. He would be angry and mean, and she did not want to face that again. But where could she get another piece of liver that late in the day? Then she remembered the old woman lying in the church next door waiting to be buried. George said that he had never had a better dinner. "Have some liver, Mina," he said. "It's just delicious." "I'm not hungry," she said. "You finish it." That night, after George had fallen asleep, Mina sat in bed trying to read, but all she could think about was what she had done. Then she heard a woman's voice. "Who has my liver?" it asked. "Who has it?" Was it her imagination? Was she dreaming? Now the voice was closer. "Who has my liver?" it asked. "Who has it?" Mina wanted to run. No, she whispered. "I don't have it. I don't have your liver." Now the voice was right next to her. "Who has my liver?" it asked. "Who has it?" Mina froze with terror. She pointed at George. "He does. He has it." Suddenly the light went out, and George screamed and screamed. Ladies, don't be this woman. For a lot of reasons. But mostly, don't marry a man. That's my advice. This one is The Black Dog. It was 11 o'clock at night. Peter Rothberg was in bed on the second floor of the old house where he lived alone. It had gotten so chilly, he went downstairs to turn up the heat. As Peter was on his way back to bed, a black dog ran down the stairs. He passed him and disappeared into the darkness. "Where did you come from?" Peter said. He had never seen the dog before. He turned on all the lights and looked in every room. He could not find the dog anywhere. He went outside and brought in the 2 watchdogs he kept in the backyard. They acted as if they were the only dogs in the house. The next night, again at 11 o'clock, Peter was in his bedroom. He heard what sounded like a dog walking around the room above him. He dashed upstairs and threw open the door. The room was empty. He looked under the bed. He looked in the closet. Nothing. But when he got back to his bedroom, he heard a dog running down the stairs. It was the black dog. He tried to follow it, but again, he could not find where it had gone. From then on, every night at 11, Peter heard the dog walking in the room above him. The room was always empty. But even after he left, the dog would come out of hiding suddenly, run down the stairs, and disappear. One night, Peter's neighbor waited with him for the dog. At the usual time, they heard it above him. Then they heard it on the stairs. When they went out into the hall, it was standing at the foot of the stairs, looking up at them. The neighbor whistled, and the dog wagged its tail. Then it was gone. Things went on in this way until the night Peter decided to bring his watchdogs into the house again. Maybe this time they would find the black dog and drive it away. Just before 11, he took them up to his bedroom and left the door open. Then he heard the black dog moving around above him. His dogs pricked their ears and ran to the door. Suddenly they bared their teeth and snarled and backed away. Peter could not see the black dog or hear it, but he was sure that it had entered his room. His dogs barked and snapped. They darted forward nervously, then backed away again. Suddenly one of them yelped, began bleeding, and dropped to the floor, its neck torn open. A minute later, it was dead. Peter's other dog backed into a corner, whimpering. Then everything was still. The next night, Peter's neighbor came back with a pistol. Again, they waited in his bedroom. At 11 o'clock, the black dog came down the stairs. As before, it looked up at them and wagged its tail. When they started toward it with the pistol, it growled and disappeared. That was the last Peter saw of the black dog, but it did not mean the dog was gone. Now and then, always at 11, he heard it moving around above him. Once he heard it running down the stairs. He never managed to see it again, but he knew that it was there. This one's called the Dead Hand. The village huddled on the edge of a vast swamp. As far as one could see, There were soggy meadows, holes filled with black water, and glistening sheets of wet, spongy peat. Skeletons of giant trees, snags, the people called them, rose up out of the muck, their dead branches reaching up like long, twisted arms. During the day, the men in the village cut the peat and hauled it home to dry and sell for fuel. But when the sun went down, and the wind, sighing and moaning, came in from the sea, the men were quick to leave. Strange creatures took over the swamp at night, and some even came into the village. That's what everyone said. People were so afraid they would not go out alone after dark. Young Tom Pattinson was the only person in the village who did not believe in such creatures. On his way home from work, he'd whisper to his friends, "There's one," and they would jump and run, and Tom would laugh and laugh. Finally, some of his friends turned on him. "If you know so much," they said, "go back into the swamp some night and you see what comes of it." "I'll do it," said Tom. "I work out there every day. Not once have I ever seen anything to frighten me. Why should it be different at night? Tomorrow night I'll take my lantern and I'll walk out to the willow snag. If I get scared and run, I'll never make fun of you again." The next night, the men went to Tom Pattinson's house to see him on his way. Thick clouds covered the moon. It was the blackest of nights. When they arrived, Tom's mother was pleading with him not to go. "I'll be all right," he said. "There's nothing to be afraid of. Don't be foolish like the rest." He took his lantern and, singing to himself, headed toward the spongy paths, toward the willow snag. Some of the young men wondered if Tom wasn't right. Maybe they were afraid of things that did not exist. A few decided to follow and see for themselves, but they stayed far behind in case he ran into trouble. They were sure they saw dark shapes moving about, but Tom's lantern kept bobbing up and down, and Tom's songs kept floating back to them, and nothing happened. Finally, they caught sight of the willow snag. There was Tom, standing in a circle of light, looking this way and that. All of a sudden, the wind blew out his lantern, and Tom stopped singing. The men stood stock still in the blackness, waiting for something awful to happen. The clouds shifted and the moon came out. There was Tom again, only now he had his back pushed up against the willow snag, and he had his arms out in front of him, as if he were fighting something off. Where the men stood, it looked like dark shapes were swirling in around him, and the clouds covered the moon again. Once more, it was black as pitch. When the moon came out again, Tom was hanging on the willow snag with one arm. His other arm was stretched out in front of him, as if something was pulling it. It looked to the men as if a rotting, moldy hand with no arm, a dead hand, had grabbed Tom's hand. With one final wrench, whatever had hold of Tom jerked him into the muck. That's what the men said. When the clouds clouded out the moon once more, the men turned and ran toward the blackness toward the village. Again and again they lost the path and fell into the muck and the water holes. In the end they crawled back on their hands and knees, but Tom Pattinson was not with them. In the morning, the people searched everywhere for Tom. Finally, they gave him up for lost. A few weeks later, toward evening, the villagers heard a cry. It was Tom's mother. She was rushing down the path from the swamp, shouting and waving. When she was sure the villagers had spotted her, she turned and ran back. Off they went after her. They found young Tom Pattinson by the willow snag, groaning and gibbering as if he had lost his mind. He kept pointing with one hand at something only he can see, but where his other hand should have been, there was nothing but a ragged stump, oozing blood. The hand had been ripped clean off. Everybody said it was the dead hand that had done it. But nobody really knows. Nobody will ever know, except Tom Pattinson, and he never spoke another word again. Okay, one more. This one is about Poltergeist. So, it's called The Trouble. The events in this story took place in 1958 in a small white house in a suburb of New York City. The names of the people involved had been changed. Monday, February 3rd, Tom Lombardo and his sister Nancy had just come home from school. Tom was going on 13, Nancy was 14. They were talking to their mother in the living room when they heard a loud pop in the kitchen. It sounded like a cork had been pulled from a bottle of champagne. There was nothing like that. The cap on a bottle of starch had somehow become unscrewed, and the bottle had tipped over and spilled. Then bottles all over the house began popping. Bottles of nail polish remover, shampoo, bleach, rubbing alcohol, even a bottle of holy water. Each had a screw cap that took 2 or 3 full turns to open, but each had opened by itself, without any human help, and then had fallen over and spilled. "What is going on here?" Miss Lombardo asked. Nobody knew. The popping soon stopped, and everything went back to normal. It's just one of those crazy things, they decided, and they put it out of their minds. Thursday, February 6th. Just after Tom and Nancy got home from school, 6 more bottles popped their caps. The next day, at about the same time, another 6 did. Sunday, February 9th. At 11 o'clock that morning, Tom was in the bathroom brushing his teeth. His father was standing in the doorway talking to him. All of a sudden, a bottle of medicine began moving across the vanity by itself and fell into the sink. At the same time, a bottle of shampoo moved to the edge of the vanity and crashed to the floor. They watched, spellbound. "I better call the police," Mr. Lombardo said. That afternoon, a patrolman interviewed the family as bottles popped in the bathroom. The police assigned a detective named Joseph Briggs to the case. Detective Briggs was a practical man. When something moved, he believed that a human or an animal had moved it, or that it had moved because of a vibration, or the wind, or some other natural cause. He did not believe in ghosts. When the Lombardos said they had nothing to do with what was going on, he thought at least one of them was lying. He went to examine the house. Then he wanted to talk to some experts and find out what they thought. Tuesday, February 11th. The bottle of holy water that had opened a week before opened a second time and spilled. 2 days later, it spilled again. Saturday, February 15th. Tom, Nancy, and a relative were watching TV in the living room when a small porcelain statue rose up from a table. It flew 3 feet through the air and then fell to the rug. Monday, February 17th. A priest blessed the Lombardos' house to protect it against whatever was causing the trouble. Thursday, February 20th. While Tom was doing his homework at one end of the dining room table, a sugar bowl at the other end flew into a hall and crashed. Detective Briggs saw it happen. Later, a bottle of ink on the table flew into a wall and broke, spattering in all directions. Then another porcelain statue took off. It traveled 12 feet and smashed into a desk. Friday, February 21st. To get some peace, the Lombardos went to a relative's house for the weekend. While they were gone, everything at home was normal. Sunday, February 23rd. When the Lombardos returned, another sugar bowl took off. It flew into a wall and smashed to smithereens. Later, a heavy bureau in Tom's room toppled over, but no one is in the room when it happened. Monday, February 24th. By now, Detective Briggs had talked to an engineer, a chemist, a physicist, and others. Some thought that vibrations in the house were causing the trouble. These could come from underground water, they said, or from high-frequency radio waves, or from sonic booms caused by airplanes. Others said that the electrical system was the cause, or downdrafts coming from the chimney. The popping of bottles was blamed on chemicals the bottles contained. Tests show that there were no vibrations in the house. There was nothing wrong with the electrical system, and there were no chemicals in the bottles that would make them pop. And what was causing the trouble? None of the experts knew, but every day the Lombardos received dozens of letters and telephone calls from people who thought they did know. Many people believed the house was haunted. They thought a poltergeist was on the loose, a noisy ghost that is blamed when things move around on their own. No one has proved that poltergeists exist, but people everywhere have told stories about them for hundreds of years. And what they have told was not too different from what was happening to the Lombardos. Detective Briggs did not, of course, believe in poltergeists. He had begun to believe that Tom Lombardo might be to blame. Whenever something happened, Tom was usually in the room or nearby. When he accused Tom of causing the trouble, the boy denied it. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "All I know is that it scares me." People said that Detective Briggs was a tough cop, who would turn on his mother if she did something wrong, but he believed Tom. Only now he didn't know what to think. Thursday, February 25th. A newspaper reporter came to the house to interview the family. Afterward, he sat in the living room by himself, hoping that something would happen that he could describe in his story. Tom's room was just across the hall from where the reporter sat. The boy had gone to bed, but he had left his door open. Suddenly, a globe of the world flew out of the darkened room and smashed into a wall. The reporter dashed into the bedroom and turned on the light. Tom was sitting in bed, blinking, as if he had just been awakened from a sound sleep. "What was that?" he asked. Wednesday, February 26th. In the morning, a small plastic statue of the Virgin Mary rose up from a dresser in Mr. and Mrs. Lombardo's bedroom and flew into a mirror. That night, while Tom was doing his homework, a 10-pound record player took off from the table, flew 15 feet, and crashed into the floor. Friday, February 28th. 2 scientists arrived from Duke University in North Carolina. They were parapsychologists who studied experiences like those the Lombardos were having. They spent several days talking to the family and examining the house, trying to understand what was going on and what was causing it. One night, a bottle of bleach popped its top, but that was all that happened during their visit. They did not tell the Lombardos about a theory they had that a poltergeist might actually be involved in such cases. According to this idea, poltergeists were not ghosts. They were normal teenagers. They'd become so troubled by a problem that their emotions built up into a kind of vibration. Since it was taking place in their unconscious minds, they didn't even know what was happening. But the vibration somehow left their bodies and moved whatever it struck. It happened again and again until the problem had been solved. Scientists had given this strange power a name. They called it psychokinesis, the ability to move objects with mental power, or mind over matter. No one knew if this really could happen or how to prove it, yet most reports of poltergeist did involve families with teenage children, and there were 2 teenagers in the Lombardo family. Monday, March 3rd. Parapsychologists said that they would prepare a report on what they had learned. The day after they left, the trouble returned with a vengeance. Tuesday, March 4th. In the afternoon, a bowl of flowers flew off the dining room table and smashed into a cupboard. Then a bottle of bleach jumped out of a cardboard box and popped its top. Then a bookcase filled with encyclopedias fell over and wedged itself between a radiator and a wall. A flashlight bulb on a table rose up and hit a wall 12 feet away. Finally, 4 knocks were heard coming across the kitchen, where nobody was in the room. Wednesday, March 5th. While Mrs. Lombardo was making breakfast, she heard a loud crash in the living room. The coffee table had turned over by itself, but that was the end of it. After a month of chaos, everything returned to normal. In August, the 2 parapsychologists gave their report. They decided that the Lombardos had not made up the story, nor had they imagined it. The trouble had been real, but what had caused it? They said that no pranks or tricks were involved, nor was any magic. As the police had done, they had also ruled out vibrations from underground water and other physical causes. The only explanation they could not rule out was the possibility that a teenage poltergeist had been at work, moving objects with mental power. They did not have enough evidence to prove it, but it was the only answer they had. If it was a poltergeist, they thought it was Tom. If they were right, if a normal boy like Tom had become a poltergeist, this might also happen to other teenagers. It might even happen to you. Here's hoping, you know. It's only 10:30, but oh my god, I'm so tired. So, I hope everybody's doing okay. I know this kind of sucks, but I'll try to come up with some kind of plan. I don't have one now. Probably in the meantime, I'll just be trying to do stuff to let you guys know that I'm still around and I still care, and I know you do too. I don't love the idea of playing over Discord. I know people probably won't be thrilled to play over Google Hangouts either. I could probably make something work, but I don't know what. In the meantime, basically just gonna be doing like extra content, watching movies, maybe making some art, maybe I'll write something. I'm trying to keep it going, but it's weird for me to not be at a physical table with stuff. I'd still like it to be in the same quality and have the same stuff that we usually do, even if we're not physically there, and it's not super easy over Discord. I know you guys want to play, and I will probably play anyways if you guys really, really, really want me to. I will make something work if you really, really want to do it. But we can still do other things even if we're not playing. But this was fun, and if you want another video of me reading something else...
You okay?
Yeah.
How's your arm?
It's okay.
Alright. Did the Benadryl help?
Kind of, yeah. It'll go down.
Nothing else will make you sleep.
I could probably read... I mean, I guess I could read, like, the Ravenloft novels. I could at least get my thoughts on them. I don't know. Maybe you guys have videos. So, I have to go edit a lot of stuff out of this recording because I messed up a lot. And I have a lot of moments where I was just sitting here flipping through pages or sitting here doing and saying nothing. Because I'm tired. But, bye bye. Bye.